I tried to live a day without my phone. What happened changed my perspective forever. I've been hooked on my phone for as long as I can remember. From scrolling through Instagram to answering work emails, it's almost like I can't function without it. A few weeks ago, I had enough. I was tired of always being plugged in, tired of mindlessly scrolling, and I decided to try something drastic. I wanted to see if I could survive a day without my phone. It's not like I was going to drop it and walk away. No, I planned it out carefully. I'd wake up in the morning, put the phone away, and see if I could make it through a whole day without checking it, responding to messages, or even looking at the time on it. I had no idea what would happen, but what I experienced during that 24 hours completely changed my perspective on life and technology. The morning started off pretty uneventfully. I had set an alarm on my phone for 7:30 a.m., so when I woke up, the first thing I did was grab for it, but then I stopped myself. I had already decided to leave my phone in the other room to force myself to begin the day without it. So there I was, staring at the empty space on my bedside table, feeling oddly liberated. It was weird at first, but I got up and started my morning routine like I always do. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything felt. There was no constant buzz or ding of notifications. The absence of those sounds was a bit unsettling at first, but as I went through my day, I started to realize how much of my time was spent just reacting to the endless notifications. The morning went by without incident, but I quickly realized how much I relied on my phone just for the basics, checking the time, the weather, or even music while I made coffee. I had been planning to go for a run to start the day with some exercise, but that's when the lack of my phone hit me hardest. Without my phone, I had no music to listen to, and I had no fitness tracker to measure my run. At first, I thought I'd just skip the workout and find something else to do, but something in me clicked. I thought to myself, you wanted to take a break from the phone, right? Let's see if you can make this work. After grabbing my coffee, I walked to a nearby park and found a bench to sit on. Normally, this would be the perfect time to scroll through social media or check my messages, but I resisted the urge. Instead, I just sat there, sipping my drink, and watched the people around me. I saw a couple walking hand in hand, a father teaching his son how to ride a bike, and a group of kids playing frisbee. I couldn't help but notice how many people were glued to their phones, oblivious to the world around them. I found it strange at first. How could they not notice the life happening right in front of them? It hit me that I'd been one of those people. How many times had I missed these simple, beautiful moments because I was checking notifications or mindlessly scrolling through apps? I started people watching, really observing the little things, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the laughter of kids echoing in the background, the sound of birds chirping. Everything felt more vivid, more alive. It was like I had removed the filter I usually place between me and the world. It felt good. As I sat there, I realized something. I had grown so accustomed to constant stimulation, to having information and entertainment at my fingertips 24/7, that I had forgotten how to simply be. Being present, with no agenda, no screen, no distractions, it was liberating. Then I thought about all the things I'd missed out on because I couldn't put my phone down. How many dinners had I half listened to, staring at my screen while someone was talking to me? How many times had I checked my phone at the dinner table or while hanging out with friends? It felt like a wake-up call. The day went on, and the longer I stayed off my phone, the more I noticed things I had been missing. I went for a walk through the city, just me and my thoughts. I saw a street performer playing the violin on the corner, and for the first time in ages, I stopped to watch. It was a simple act, but it felt incredibly intimate, like a secret moment between me and this stranger. Without my phone, I was able to fully engage with what was going on around me. I wasn't distracted by buzzing notifications or the pressure to check Instagram every few minutes. It was freeing. I decided to take a walk by the river, where I often went when I needed to clear my mind. The view was peaceful, with the sun reflecting off the water. I stood there for a while, letting the moment wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely calm and at peace. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I realized something. This day without my phone had become more than just a challenge. It was a reset, a chance to reconnect with myself and the world around me. Without constant digital noise, I could actually hear my own thoughts, and for once, they didn't feel overwhelming. At some point, I even caught myself smiling, feeling light, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This quiet, simple day felt like a privilege. I realized I'd been so caught up in the rush of daily life, constantly attached to my phone, that I had forgotten what it was like to just be in the moment. I was starting to feel more in control, and that felt incredibly empowering. As the day went on, something else started to shift. I realized I wasn't missing out on anything by not having my phone. At first, I had thought I'd feel disconnected from the world, like I was missing out on important updates or conversations. But as the hours passed, I began to see it differently. The world wasn't passing me by. I was simply more present in it. I went to a cafe later in the evening, still phone-free, and it was almost surreal. The people around me were all engrossed in their phones, typing away or scrolling mindlessly, while I sat there with nothing but my own thoughts and a cup of coffee. It felt like I was an outsider to this modern, hyper-connected world. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel FOMO, fear of missing out. I felt free. I started thinking about how much time I spent on my phone, how it had become a reflex to check it when I was bored, anxious, or even just idle. But now, without it, I was having actual conversations with people, noticing small things I would have missed before. I started talking to the barista about his favorite coffee beans, and before I knew it, we were chatting about local art galleries and our favorite spots in the city. It felt so refreshing to connect with someone without a screen in between us. I couldn't help but reflect on the people I had been ignoring by constantly being on my phone. The people who tried to reach out to me, but I was too distracted to respond properly. I thought of my friends who had messaged me earlier that day. Half the time, I'd been replying without really listening or engaging. But today, I was actually present with the people I interacted with, whether it was the barista, the street performer, or even just the strangers I passed by on my walk. Make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss more shocking and real stories like this one. The evening started to approach, and I still hadn't picked up my phone. The idea of going the whole day without it was starting to feel less like a challenge and more like a liberation. As the day went on, I felt an increasing sense of clarity. It was almost as though I had rediscovered what it was like to be truly present, to exist without the constant pull of notifications and messages. But then, just as I was feeling pretty good about myself, a wave of unease hit me. The realization slowly crept in. I didn't know if I'd be able to do this every day. The phone was so ingrained in my routine, and the world had become so dependent on instant access to information that, for the first time in the day, I wondered if it was even possible to truly live without it in the long run. At that moment, I decided to take a walk through the park. As I strolled through the trails, I realized just how much of my environment I had missed out on. The laughter of children playing, the distant sounds of music from a nearby street musician, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, these were things I would have ignored had I been glued to my phone. I sat on a bench for a while, lost in my thoughts. There was no buzzing or ringing to interrupt me, no distractions, just the world around me and my own mind. I felt calm. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. I couldn't remember the last time I'd given myself this much space to think, to reflect, without the constant barrage of information. It dawned on me that we often see our phones as tools for productivity, connection, and entertainment. But in many ways, they're the opposite. They connect us to everything but the present moment. They're a tool that pulls us away from truly experiencing the world and the people around us. And yet, they're so indispensable to our daily lives that it's hard to imagine how anyone could survive without them. But today, I was surviving. No phone, no distractions, just me and the world. And it was surprisingly enough. As the sun began to set, I sat at a cafe, still phone-free, reflecting on the day. The old me would have been checking my notifications, scrolling through social media, or answering work emails. But without that pressure, I found myself savoring my food more, engaging in actual conversations with the people around me, and being present in a way I hadn't been in months. It was almost like I was rediscovering the simple joys of life, things that I had forgotten in the haze of endless screen time. But then came the real test. The waiter handed me the bill, and like clockwork, my hand reached for my phone to make a payment. Wait, I had no phone. For the first time that day, I felt vulnerable. It was a strange feeling, almost like I had forgotten a part of myself. But instead of panicking, I paid the bill in cash, something I hadn't done in a long time. The simple act of using cash felt like an achievement in itself, something I hadn't thought about in years. That's when it really hit me. Our reliance on phones goes beyond just social media. It's not just about checking messages or looking up directions. It's about convenience. Everything is at our fingertips now. Payments, reminders, social interactions, entertainment. And without that crutch, I felt a little unprepared. But surprisingly, I didn't feel entirely lost. I didn't feel disconnected in the way I thought I would. I felt like I had a new kind of control, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if I had stepped off the treadmill of constant information overload and onto solid ground. It felt good to pause, to reflect, and to let the world unfold without being glued to a screen. For the first time in months, I could focus without my mind racing from one notification to the next. The idea that I had lived an entire day without feeling overwhelmed felt empowering. Sure, it wasn't easy, and I wasn't pretending that it wasn't a challenge, but it was eye-opening. At that point, I realized I had just experienced something I couldn't ignore. For once, I wasn't a slave to my phone. I was in control, but how would this affect me moving forward? The next morning, I woke up, and the first thing I did wasn't reaching for my phone. It was just lying there on the nightstand, untouched. I was surprised by how different it felt, like I was finally seeing the world without the usual distractions. The silence was almost comforting. But then the questions began. How would I continue without my phone? Would I really keep this up? The thing is, as I went about my day, I started noticing how much we rely on these devices. I needed to make a call, check my calendar, reply to a few work emails, but I had no phone. At first, I felt the absence like an itch I couldn't scratch. It was uncomfortable, like I was missing a part of my routine. The anxiety started creeping in, especially when I realized I couldn't text anyone to ask a question or make quick plans. I found myself heading back to my apartment to grab my phone. I figured, hey, it's just for a few things. I'll just check in and then continue the experiment. But when I picked it up, I froze. What was I doing? Wasn't this supposed to be about getting a break from the constant ping of notifications, from the never-ending work emails, the social media posts, the pressure to be on all the time? That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't just check it briefly. I would leave it behind for a second day. The moment I made that choice, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Sure, it was a little scary, but I realized I didn't need the phone to get through the day. What I really needed was to reconnect with myself and the world around me. I knew I had to take this a step further and learn to embrace the quiet, to embrace the freedom from constant connection. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control, not the phone. The second day without my phone turned out to be even more transformative than the first. I had expected some struggle, but I never thought it would feel so liberating. The freedom was overwhelming in a way I hadn't anticipated. I noticed things I'd ignored for years, the sound of the birds chirping outside, the way the sun warmed the pavement in the morning, even the small details of my own thoughts that had once been drowned out by endless notifications. The absence of my phone gave me space to think, to breathe. It was like I'd been walking through a fog, and for the first time, the fog was lifting. I realized how much time I had spent scrolling through meaningless feeds, checking messages that didn't matter, and constantly checking for updates that added no value to my life. Without my phone, I wasn't distracted by the constant bombardment of other people's opinions. Instead, I started having deeper conversations, real ones. At lunch, I met a friend at a cafe, and we talked for hours. We caught up on everything without the usual interruptions, the constant checking of messages, or the compulsion to take photos for social media. It felt refreshing. I had never realized how little quality time I'd been having with people, always half engaged in conversation while multitasking on my phone. But as the day wore on, I started feeling a strange mixture of both peace and a nagging feeling. I wanted to share this experience, but how? How could I explain the beauty of real-life interaction to someone who couldn't imagine life without their phone? I'll admit, there was a moment of doubt. What if I was missing out on something important? What if someone tried to reach me? What if I was disconnected from the world and I wasn't aware of it? Still, I pushed through the doubt. It felt better to be truly present in the moment, and honestly, this break made me realize how much time I was wasting online. It was like I had finally given myself permission to step away from the noise, and I could feel the benefits of that decision. By the evening, I was starting to feel the full impact of my phone-free day. I had spent the entire afternoon immersed in activities I hadn't done in years, reading a book from start to finish without feeling the urge to check my phone every few minutes, walking through a park and just appreciating the scenery, and even sitting down at my desk, writing in a journal for the first time in ages. Something inside me clicked. I'd been so caught up in the digital world, in trying to keep up with the latest trends, messages, and posts, that I had forgotten what it was like to live in the real world. Without the constant presence of my phone, I felt more connected to myself and the people around me. But then, as the sun set and the evening grew darker, I felt a bit of fear creeping in. There was a temptation to pick up my phone, just to check what I was missing, even though I knew I'd be fine without it. But I resisted. I thought about how, over the past 24 hours, I had been able to rediscover a version of myself that wasn't dependent on technology. It was a version of me that didn't feel the need to constantly check in or post updates. Instead of scrolling mindlessly, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch. For the first time, I was not preoccupied with who had liked my last post or what was happening in the world that I could see on my screen. Instead, I just sat there, watching the night unfold. And for once, I didn't feel the need to share it with anyone. This peace, this clarity, was exactly what I needed. As the night went on, I felt a deep sense of relief wash over me. I knew I had completed my experiment, but it had also left me with something I hadn't expected, a feeling of clarity and self-awareness. The break from my phone allowed me to disconnect not only from the world, but from the pressure I had unknowingly been putting on myself to always be available, always be in the loop. When I finally picked up my phone the next morning, I was hit with a flood of notifications, emails, messages, social media alerts. But instead of feeling the usual rush of anxiety, I felt oddly detached. I had seen what it was like to go without, and while the world had continued on without me, it had also shown me how much I had been missing in my own life. I realized that it wasn't just about living without my phone, it was about living without the constant need to be plugged in. I began to wonder how many moments I had missed, how many experiences I had rushed through, simply because I was looking down at a screen. So, what did I learn from this? Well, I think the biggest takeaway was that it's okay to disconnect sometimes. It's okay to not always be available, to give yourself some space to breathe and be in the moment. My phone was never going anywhere, but I needed to take back control of my life. I didn't need to be tethered to it to live my best life. If you've ever felt like you're too attached to your phone, maybe it's time to give this a try. A day without it might just change the way you view your life. Take a break, be present, and see what happens. Let me know in the comments if you've ever tried to live without your phone and how it affected you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more personal stories like this one.